Is the U.S. likely to attack Iran? Even as Iran warns the U.S. and Israel. 1. The current situation, tension and unrest, January 2026. In early January 2026, widespread nationwide protests erupted across Iran, sparked by economic hardship and political dissatisfaction. These protests have led to hundreds of deaths, thousands of arrests, and severe internet blackouts as the government tries to suppress dissent. AP News. Meanwhile, the U.S. government has signaled a readiness to use force against Iran if necessary, including airstrikes, if the Iranian regime violently continues its crackdown on civilians. The White House has stated that diplomacy is the primary path, but military options remain on the table. The Guardian. Turkey and other regional powers have cautioned against foreign intervention, warning it would exacerbate instability throughout the Middle East. Reuters. Iran's leadership has responded by declaring the country prepared for war but ready to negotiate, warning that military action by the U.S. would trigger retaliation. Time. Iran has also explicitly warned that any U.S. military strike would lead to retaliation against both U.S. bases and Israel, calling them legitimate targets. Reuters. 2. Historical context, past incidents and precedent. To assess the likelihood of future attacks, it's crucial to understand the background. June 2025 conflict. Israel launched significant airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities including Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. These operations were among the largest offensive military actions by Israel against Iran since the Iran-Iraq War. Iran responded by launching missile and drone strikes toward Israel. Although the conflict was intense, the U.S. did not publicly confirm direct intervention at that time, even though reports and some unofficial sources indicated U.S. strikes against Iranian nuclear sites in support of Israel. Iran repeatedly warned that U.S. involvement would escalate the conflict into a war total, likely engulfing the broader region. These events underscore that the U.S. and Israel have acted against Iranian targets in the past, and Iran has repeatedly threatened forceful retaliation. 3. Strategic and political calculus. When evaluating whether future attacks will occur, several factors matter. A. U.S. policy and domestic politics. The current U.S. administration, as of early 2026, has publicly linked its stance on Iran to protection of protesters and pressure on the regime, combining economic sanctions with threats of military force. National security advisors and some members of Congress have expressed support for a tough stance, but not all policymakers agree that war is the best option. Experts widely believe that direct U.S. military action against Iran would not make the U.S. more stabilize the region and global markets. A professional poll of international relations scholars reported strong consensus that U.S. strikes on Iran would be counterproductive and riskier than strategic non-military pressure. Foreign policy. B. Israel's security concerns. Israel views Iran's nuclear and missile capabilities as existential threats. Since the 1980s, Tehran's rhetoric about Israel has been highly hostile, reinforcing Israeli concerns. Wikipedia. Israel's military has previously conducted long-range strikes on Iranian territory, demonstrating both capability and willingness to use force, but these moves have been independent and not always directly coordinated with Washington. This distinction matters. Israel might act without U.S. consent, but U.S. participation remains more cautious and conditional. 4. Risks of escalation and regional impact. A direct U.S. attack on Iran would almost certainly trigger Iranian retaliation against U.S. bases and Israel, as Tehran has warned repeatedly. Reuters. Proxy escalation through Hezbollah, militias in Iraq and Yemen, and other aligned groups, creating a multi-front conflict. Global economic shocks, particularly in oil markets, since Iran controls access points like the Strait of Hormuz. Foreign Affairs Forum. These risks help explain why world powers like Turkey, Oman, and Gulf states have urged restraint and diplomacy, even as protests and unrest intensify inside Iran. 5. Likelihood of attack. A balanced view. Will the U.S. attack Iran? Possibility. Yes. The U.S. has not ruled out military force and has escalated rhetoric amid domestic unrest in Iran. Context. Any military action would likely be highly targeted, e.g., against nuclear or missile infrastructure, not a full-scale invasion. Will Israel attack Iran? Possibility. Higher. Israel has conducted strikes in the past and sees Iran's capabilities as an immediate threat. RTV. Constraints. Israel avoids full-scale war without strategic backstop and technological advantage, and the risks of retaliation are significant. Will they act jointly? Conditional. U.S. and Israeli military coordination could occur, but only under circumstances where both governments believe diplomatic options are exhausted and imminent threats are clear, still a relatively narrow window. 6. Bottom line. At this moment, January 2026, Small Blue Diamond, a major U.S. Israel attack on Iran is not imminent, but the risk cannot be ruled out entirely. Small Blue Diamond, both countries have shown readiness to use force under specific conditions, but direct full-scale war is widely viewed as a last resort. Small Blue Diamond, the situation remains